Once upon a time, in a small village, there lived a kind and beautiful girl named Cinderella. She had golden hair and bright blue eyes. She was always cheerful and polite to everyone. But Cinderella's life was not easy. Her mother had passed away when she was very young. After some time, her father remarried a woman with 2 daughters. They became Cinderella's stepsisters. Cinderella's stepmother and stepsisters were very unkind to her. They made her do all the chores in the house. Every day, Cinderella swept the floors, cleaned the dishes, and cooked the meals. She also washed their clothes and made their beds. While Cinderella worked, her stepsisters played or rested. They never helped her, and they often teased her. Cinderella's stepsisters were not as beautiful as she was. They were jealous of her kindness and beauty. To make her feel bad, they gave her old, torn clothes to wear. They also made her sleep on a small bed in the attic. Cinderella did not complain. She was patient and strong. She often talked to the birds and mice in the attic. They became her only friends. She named the mice and birds, and they would chirp and squeak happily when they saw her. Their cheerful company made her days a little brighter. One day, a messenger from the king came to the village. He brought exciting news. The prince was hosting a royal ball at the palace. All the young women in the kingdom were invited. The prince wanted to find a bride. Cinderella's stepsisters were very excited. They dreamed of marrying the prince. They rushed to the tailor to get new dresses. They also bought beautiful shoes and jewelry. Cinderella wanted to go to the ball too. She asked her stepmother for permission. "You?" Her stepmother laughed. "You cannot go to the ball. You have no dress or shoes. You look like a servant." Cinderella felt sad, but she did not give up. "If I finish all my work, may I go?" she asked. Her stepmother thought for a moment. Then she said, "If you can finish all your chores and find something suitable to wear, you can go." Cinderella worked hard all day. She cleaned every room in the house. She washed the dishes, swept the floors, and even polished the windows. By the time she finished, she was very tired. She went to the attic to look for a dress. She found an old gown that had belonged to her mother. It was a little old, but still beautiful. Cinderella fixed it with help from her animal friends. The mice sewed the torn parts, and the birds added ribbons. When Cinderella showed her dress to her stepsisters, they laughed. "You think you can wear this to the ball?" they said. Then they ripped the dress and left for the ball with their mother. Cinderella sat in the garden and cried. She felt hopeless. Suddenly, a bright light appeared. It was a fairy godmother. She had a kind smile and a magic wand. "Why are you crying, my dear?" the fairy godmother asked. Cinderella told her everything. The fairy godmother smiled and said, "Don't worry. You shall go to the ball." With a wave of her wand, the fairy godmother turned a pumpkin into a golden carriage. She turned 6 mice into horses and a rat into a coachman. Then she looked at Cinderella and said, "Now for your dress." With another wave of her wand, Cinderella's torn dress turned into a beautiful gown. It was light blue and sparkled like the stars. On her feet, she wore glass slippers that fit perfectly. She also wore a shining necklace and earrings that made her look like a real princess. Cinderella looked at herself and smiled. "Thank you, fairy godmother," she said. "You look lovely, my dear," said the fairy godmother. "But remember, the magic will end at midnight. You must leave the ball before the clock strikes 12. Cinderella promised and stepped into the carriage. She waved goodbye to her fairy godmother and went to the palace. On the way, she felt nervous, but also excited. She had never been to a palace before. When Cinderella arrived at the palace, everyone turned to look at her. She was the most beautiful girl there. Even her stepsisters did not recognize her. They thought she must be a princess from another kingdom. The grand ballroom was decorated with golden lights and beautiful flowers. Music played, and people danced happily. The prince saw Cinderella and walked over to her. "Would you like to dance?" he asked. Cinderella nodded. "Yes, I would love to." The prince and Cinderella danced all night. They talked and laughed. Cinderella forgot about her stepmother and stepsisters. She felt like a princess. The prince could not take his eyes off her. Everyone in the ballroom watched them and wondered who she was. As they danced, the prince said, "I have never met anyone like you. What is your name?" Before Cinderella could answer, the clock began to chime. It was midnight. She remembered the fairy godmother's warning. "I'm sorry, but I must go," Cinderella said. She ran out of the palace. On the stairs, one of her glass slippers fell off. The prince called after her, but she didn't stop. She jumped into her carriage, and it drove away just as the clock struck 12. The carriage turned back into a pumpkin, and Cinderella's gown turned back into her old clothes. She walked home with one glass slipper in her hand. Her heart was full of joy and sadness at the same time. The next day, the prince announced that he would marry the girl who fit the glass slipper. He sent messengers to every house in the kingdom. They carried the glass slipper and asked every young woman to try it on. When the messengers came to Cinderella's house, her stepsisters tried the slipper first. Their feet were too big. They pushed and squeezed, but it did not fit. They even tried to hide their disappointment, but it was clear they were upset. "Is there anyone else in the house?" the messenger asked. Cinderella's stepmother said, "No, only a servant girl. She didn't go to the ball." But the messenger insisted. Cinderella came into the room. She sat down and tried on the slipper. It fit perfectly. The messenger smiled and said, "You are the one the prince is looking for." Cinderella took out the other slipper and put it on. Her stepsisters and stepmother were shocked. They could not believe their eyes. The messenger took Cinderella to the palace. When the prince saw her, He was very happy. "Will you marry me?" he asked. Cinderella smiled. "Yes, I will." Cinderella and the prince had a grand wedding. Everyone in the kingdom came to celebrate. The palace was filled with music, food, and laughter. Cinderella's fairy godmother came too, smiling from afar. Cinderella forgave her stepmother and stepsisters, but they moved away from the palace. She also made sure that the people who worked in the palace were treated kindly. She knew how hard it was to do all the work alone. Cinderella and the prince lived happily ever after. She never forgot her fairy godmother or her animal friends. She remained kind and humble, and she was loved by all. The people in the kingdom often told her story to inspire others to be kind, patient, and hopeful.